I will not leave this seat. Her voice was calm, but it carried like a bell in a small church. Why must I prove what others are allowed to assume? A hush fell before the answer came, clipped and practiced. Ma'am, it's procedure. Overhead lights hummed. Phone stilled in half-raised hands. Holiday travelers held their breath the way a room does when a candle flickers low. A grandmother's cardigan rustled. A gate of rules seemed to swing shut on quiet hinges. The aisle narrowed, not by inches, but by judgment. A manager adjusted his tie. A uniformed officer shifted his stance, and eyes began to weigh a woman who had already paid for her place. The air tasted of citrus cleaner and cooling coffee, and somewhere beyond the window a runway glowed like a patient line of stars. In this pressurized silence, with dignity seated and doubt standing over it, one question pressed forward, steady and unblinking. When procedure is used like a lock, what key can open justice? The afternoon carried the familiar hum of late November at John F. Kennedy, a tide of travelers drifting through polished floors and holiday banners. The air outside held a thin, clean cold, the kind that kissed cheeks pink before the sliding doors admitted everyone to warmth and noise. Doctor? Maya Johnson moved with practiced ease, a slim carry-on in tow, a coat folded over her arm, a tablet tucked beneath it. At the counter, a smiling agent glanced at her boarding pass, wished her a gentle, happy Thanksgiving, and handed it back with the unhurried confidence of someone who had already shepherded hundreds of guests that day. A family nearby negotiated snacks and strollers, and a plush bear that kept slipping from a small pair of arms, while a college kid behind Maya juggled a paper cup from a familiar coffee chain and a phone call about a connecting bus out west. Prices were a frequent topic, the season's markups an inevitable refrain. But hope still outshone weariness. Everyone had somewhere to be by dinner time, if the weather and the schedules would only cooperate. Maya appreciated quiet pockets more than most. This terminal offered them if one knew where to look. The long window overlooking a field of moving tail fins, the sleepy bookstore with its table display of travel memoirs, the bench beneath a framed photograph of the airport when it first opened. She paused there for breath and a sip of water, felt the steadying weight of her day settle into routine. The business trip was straight for Los Angeles for meetings that mattered, the sort that could shift an entire quarter when handled with care. She reminded herself not to work until the wheels left the ground. One fly could be a gentle bridge between two kinds of concentration. Boarding began with an efficient roll of announcements. The pre-boards and families were ushered down the jet bridge first, then those with aisle seats, then first class. With a nod to the gate agent, Maya stepped forward, let the scanner blink acceptance, and followed the steady, carpeted slope to the aircraft door. The cabin greeted her with the warm glow of ceiling lights and the faint mingling of citrus cleanser and brewed coffee. A flight attendant stationed by the galley offered a professional smile and a hand gesture toward the forward rows. She found seat 2A easily, placed her carry-on overhead, slid into the white seat, and arranged her coat and tablet in neat order. The cushion had just the right give. The armrest controls were tucked where one's fingers might expect them to be. A single window framed a sliver of wing and the distant choreography of service trucks. The cabin filled at an unhurried clip. A man across the aisle tucked a newspaper into his seat back, its headline about a late-season storm sweeping the Midwest. A grandmother in a cardigan sank into one seat, apologized to no one in particular for the rustle of her tote, and then murmured to the flight attendant about whether coffee would be available shortly. In the second row center, a young woman in a wool coat balanced a paperback and an oversized scarf and looked relieved when she finally wrestled both into place. A couple in the first row negotiated legroom, each trying to give the other an inch. People make small compromises and small claims the way travelers do, when everyone recognizes they will be sharing a small, important world for a few hours. It was domestic America in miniature, a chorus of polite gestures, private worries, and that familiar holiday mixture of anticipation and fatigue. Maya slid the tablet from its sleeve, glanced at a calendar full of color blocks, and let her gaze fall to the window again. The light over the ramp fell thin and silver. A tug rolled past like a patient beetle. On the glass, she could just make out the reflection of herself, a woman whose work required clarity and patience more than spectacle. She did not think about titles or contracts or the way her decisions shaped the routes others flew. On the plane, she preferred to be a passenger among passengers, a person with a destination and a quiet plan for how to make the best use of hours in transit. If she missed dinner on the far coast, she would find a warm diner near the hotel and leave a fair tip and a smile, and that would be enough for the night. Across the aisle, the man with the newspaper reached for the attendant call button, then thought better of it and let his hand fall. He glanced at Maya's row, a quick, neutral look, and then returned to smoothing the corner of his travel pillow. From the forward galley came a low exchange of voices, routine back and forth about headcount, overhead space, and a special meal on board for someone in row 3. The public address dinged with the soft, well-worn chime that seems to exist in every plane and every story about planes. A recorded voice asked for larger items beneath seats to be stowed in the overhead bins and reminded everyone that the flight would be on its way as soon as the last bag sat down. The smallest currents of holiday travel found their way into the cabin. A lively debate about football from row 4, a whispered calculation of time zones from row 1, a warm promise to a grandchild over the phone that he would see his granddad very soon. Maya's mind arranged her own hours. A brief glance at notes while the plane taxied, then a pause for takeoff, then perhaps a chapter from a book that had waited patiently in her bag all month. She believed in little rituals that granted shape to chaos. Order did not need to be inflexible. It only needed to be kind. It was as she slid a pen into the seat pocket that she sensed the change in temperature before the temperature changed. Presence is its own weather. A flight attendant in a crisp uniform stepped into the aisle at row 2 and paused, not in a posture of assistance, but in one of evaluation. Her name badge caught the light and then turned away from it as she angled slightly toward Maya's shoulder. Politeness can sometimes arrive like a test, and the attendant's smile had that quality, now a thin line, a curiosity that was not curiosity, a may I help you that did not sound like an offer. Maya met the gaze with the same steady patience she used with complicated spreadsheets and long negotiations. Good manners were her first language. She kept them ready even when other people mislaid theirs. The attendant's eyes traveled from the seat number placard to Maya's lap to the tablet and back again, as if the math of the row demanded rechecking. A few nearby travelers sensed, in the way humans do, that a moment was taking form. Heads turned not rudely but briefly, the way one glances toward a dropped utensil in a quiet restaurant. "Welcome aboard," the attendant said, the words perfectly shaped but cool around the edges. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" The voice belonged to Emily Carter, as the badge confirmed when Maya's eyes flicked down. The tone was not entirely unusual for a request like this, and yet there was a note beneath it, something faint and metallic. "Of course," Maya answered, offering the slim rectangle and her identification as if handing over a well-polished stone. Everything in her movement was unhurried, everything in her face open. Emily took the pass without looking at Maya, glanced at the name, at the seat, at the class of service, then held it up as if the light might tell a different story than the ink. From row 1C, the grandmother adjusted her cardigan, watching the interaction with a soft, puzzled frown. The man with the newspaper folded it with a little too much precision and set it aside. In row 3, the young woman in the wool coat paused in mid-text and lowered her phone into her lap. People who had been, only moments ago, preoccupied with overhead space and armrest boundaries found themselves temporarily united by curiosity. The mood did not tilt yet, but it leaned. Emily returned the boarding pass and identification in a manner so careful it almost seemed careless. "Thank you," she said, but it carried the weight of a question that lingered in the air, unanswered because it had not been asked aloud. The briefest exchange of glances moved through the first 2 rows like a quickly spread rumor, a narrowing of eyes here, a tightened mouth there, the quiet evaluation of a social moment that might or might not turn into something larger. The recorded announcement spoke again about tray tables and seat backs, but for a handful of people in the forward cabin, another narrative had already stepped onto the stage. Maya set the boarding pass on the armrest, slid the identification back into her wallet, and allowed herself one calm breath. Her plan for the flight did not change. She would read a little while the aircraft waited its turn, then let the hum of engines carry her thoughts from one coast to the other. She adjusted the belt lightly across her waist, Somewhere behind her, a child giggled at a cartoon on a tablet. Somewhere farther back, someone laughed too loudly at a private joke, the way people do when they are almost where they need to be, and the world suddenly feels generous. Emily did not step away. The pause stretched. The young woman in row 3 caught Maya's eye for an instant and offered the smallest nod, the kind strangers exchange when they recognize another stranger's grace under a small pressure. Maya returned the nod and turned her attention to the window again, to the distance and the wing and the toy-like vehicles that darted and paused and spun around the aircraft like roles in a choreographed play. Holidays bring out the best in patience and the worst in nerves. Maya knew that well enough to forgive what did not yet require forgiveness. She had flown enough to understand that flight attendants manage a complicated ballet that often goes unseen, that fatigue turns straightforward tasks into tightropes, that a smile can be a shield as much as it is an offering. She folded her calm around her like an extra scarf, warm and thin and sufficient. But the air in row 2 continued to cool. Emily shifted her stance, leaned a fraction closer, and let her eyes settle firmly on Maya's face, seeking confirmation of something the boarding pass had already provided. The grandmother in row 1 chose that moment to ask, very softly, whether coffee might be possible before takeoff, and Emily did not answer. In the galley, a colleague's voice floated up with a question about the count in coach, but Emily did not turn. She had selected the point of focus, and the point of focus was seat 2A. The holiday crowd went on murmuring. The window went on holding a still frame of silver light. The city beyond the airport continued to tumble forward toward evening. The plane remained for a few more minutes, a small room where stories cross and sometimes collide. The first chapter of this flight, like the first chapter of many flights, had been simple. Get on board, settle in, lift off. Most days, that is all a story needs. Some days, it needs one more scene. A single sentence spoken by someone who does not yet know what it will set in motion. Emily leaned down, her voice small but clear enough for those close by to hear. Emily lowered herself, her voice small but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Sorry, this seat must be a mistake. The words hung in the air between them like a thin sheet of frost that would not melt. Those close enough to hear felt the hush that follows a remark made in a tone too cool for welcome. For a heartbeat, the plane was all breathing and soft fabric sounds, and the distant murmur of a public address, voice talking about overhead bins, and then awareness gathered itself around row 2, the way people gather around a question they do not want to answer too quickly. Doctor. Maya Johnson rested her palms lightly on the armrests and met the attendant's gaze with an evenness that neither challenged nor retreated. Politeness stayed where it belonged, on both sides. But the light in Emily Carter's eyes was the careful light of someone who has decided to look for confirmation of a suspicion rather than the end of one. Outside the windows, the late November afternoon dulled toward the kind of gray that comes before early dusk. In the cabin, the overhead lights kept a warm promise of comfort, and the forward galley carried the friendly scent of brewing coffee and orange peel. Passengers were still settling, the way people settle when they have surrendered to a shared schedule. Coats tucked, bags nudged, headphones adjusted, that small sigh of relief when a carry-on finally slides into a space that seems too small at first glance. A family across the aisle negotiated a last-minute seat swap so a child could sit by the window. The mother whispered that they would FaceTime grandparents when they landed. If the connection was kind, somewhere behind, someone finished a call with a gentle, "See you at dinner, I promise." And the words placed an invisible marker on the evening to come. The forward cabin held its own collection of travelers. In one seat, a woman of grandmotherly age in the soft cardigan Margaret Wilson, as it would become known, watched the exchange with the open curiosity of someone who has lived long enough to have seen both misunderstandings and miracles. A few seats over, a man in an understated blazer, David Clark slipped his phone into a side pocket and glanced up with a face arranged into a neutral, courteous expression. Neither was unkind. Neither had yet decided what to make of the moment. They were simply present, as people are, bearing witness without acknowledging that they were doing so. Emily's voice, when it came again, stayed quiet. "May I see your boarding pass once more, please, and your identification as well?" The sentence was pure procedure, The kind of request passengers meet every day with a nod and a hand gesture toward a wallet. Yet, there was an edge beneath the surface, a narrowing that turned routine into examination. Maya offered both items without flourish. The boarding pass, a smooth rectangle, the identification card, a familiar weight. Everything about her movements suggested a person accustomed to demonstrating good faith one measured step at a time. Emily took the documents and studied them in a way that did not seem to be about reading at all. Her eyes moved back and forth between name and seat assignment, between class of service and roll marker, as if expecting a letter to change places while she looked away. The very small muscles around her mouth held still. She raised the boarding pass toward the cabin light, angling it the way someone angles a photograph to find a better story in it. The hum of conversation at the front of the plane found a lower key, and the pre-flight announcements floated through at a volume that suggested uniform courtesy rather than urgency. Third-person perspective allows a reader to stand near many hearts at once, and if one could listen inside the few rows that witnessed this quiet scene, one would have heard a range of private practice explanations. Some people recalled times when a simple detail had been mismatched, and a gentle apology had sent everyone forward. Others remembered that certain faces too often had to prove what others were allowed to assume. Still others held themselves apart, unwilling to see any pattern in a single moment, especially when the moment might slow a long day even more. The plane, like the country, contained multitudes. Maya's own thoughts did not reach for speeches or strategies. She breathed as she had been taught to breathe when pressure arrives uninvited. In through the nose, out through the mouth, a slow rhythm that keeps the entire body from leaning forward into a conflict it does not want. The boarding pass had her name on it. The seat belonged to that name. If the situation remained a matter of verification, she would endure the verification. If it wandered into something else, she would assess that when it came. Her eyes softened toward the window, toward the wing and the runway that waited as patiently as wings and runways can. Emily lowered the card and glanced down at Maya's lap, then at the seat number placard, then back at the boarding pass as if each look might align something previously misaligned. "Thank you," she said, and the syllables fell flat, an acknowledgement without acceptance. She held onto the documents a heartbeat longer than necessary, then returned the identification first and the boarding pass second, the order telegraphing a small choice no one had asked her to make. The pass touched Maya's open hand and then slid toward the tray table, catching the light, catching the breath of 2 or 3 people whose attention now had nowhere else to go. A few rows back, a man with a bald cap lifted his head in the habit of someone listening for a score update, then lowered it again when he realized the moment in front of him was not about football at all. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, the way eyes narrow when a person searches her memory for a reason to excuse a pattern rather than to confirm it. David straightened just enough to signal he was paying attention, then relaxed his shoulders so as not to draw attention to the fact. In the galley, a second attendant peeked forward, caught Emily's eye, and then turned back to the checklist that must be completed before any door is closed and any wheels are up. "Is there anything else I can provide?" Maya asked. Her tone was steady, a gentle invitation to bring the conversation back to the level of air where people breathe without thinking about it. She did not raise her chin or her voice. She did not lower either. Her fingers, still curved around the edge of the tray table where the boarding pass had come to rest, did not tighten. Grace often looks like stillness to those who are not looking closely, but it is a choice, held and rashed out until the choice holds everything around it. Emily flicked a glance over her shoulder and then back, as if help might arrive and remake the moment into something easier to explain. "We are full up front," she said, a necessary fact that arrived as a small scold. "We have to make sure all of our seats are occupied by the right guests." There it was. The word right, used the way a person uses it when the word feels like a compass but works like a gate. A tiny murmur moved through the first 2 rows, the rustle of a newspaper folded and unfolded, the shift of a coat, the soft sound of a zipper closed a fraction of an inch. Maya nodded once. "I understand." She did not say more. The plane had taught her that spoken explanations often twist themselves into threads that tie around the speaker before they bind the listener. Silence is not surrender when it is chosen with care. The public address offers safety instructions in a voice that rose and fell gently, like a small boat on a cooperative tide. The phrases were the same ones heard a million times in a million cabins. seat backs upright, tray tables stowed, devices in airplane mode. A map graphic glowed faintly on the bulkhead screen, the route line a curved breadth from one coast to the other. Outside, a service truck paused at the wing and then moved on. Inside, the human machine of small decisions and tiny avoidances continued to turn. Emily adjusted her posture the way people do when they have decided not to let go of a point, even when the point has proven uncooperative. "Would you mind if I verify something with the front?" she asked. The sentence perched between the request and the warning. Maya gestured with an open hand toward the galley, a gesture that gave permission without ceding dignity. Of course. She did not watch Emily walk away. Instead, she took up the boarding pass again, laid it flat, and pressed a thumb to the paper's edge as if to keep the moment from curling up on itself. One row up, Margaret smoothed the corner of a scarf and lifted her chin toward Maya in the motion that said quite clearly, "I saw what I saw, and I am still deciding what it means." Across the aisle, David studied the sleek ceiling panel, the recessed light with its gentle halo, the call button that looked like a tiny star. He had the air of a person rehearsing an action before he takes it, as if turning it over in his hand invisibly to make sure it fits. When Emily returned, a new coolness came with her. "I will need to see your identification again," she said. The words were still polite, but they carried a pride she had not earned. Maya complied without delay. The attendant inspected as if for counterfeit, as if a hologram shifts only when watched with suspicion. She passed the card back, and this time the motion lacked even the courtesy of a neutral handoff. The plastic edged against skin and then clacked softly on the table. The sound was nothing and not nothing. It created a small echo in the narrow aisle, a cue for 2 or 3 people to draw a little sharper breath, for one person to exhale through pursed lips. There are many ways to demean a person without saying an unkind word. An item can be handled as if it is less worthy of care than other items. A request can be phrased for the person rather than to the person. A smile can be applied like a sticker, placed over a surface without considering what it covers. None of these things are accidents when they happen in sequence. There are choices braided together into a rope that looks too thin to bind until someone tries to stand up and finds the rope around her. Maya did not reach for a speech then either. She simply placed her identification back in her wallet, slid the boarding pass beside it, and closed the clasp. The tiniest quiver of tiredness passed across her face and was gone again. She touched the armrest with her fingertips, a private reminder that she occupied a place she had the right to occupy. The seat did not suddenly change its shape. The armrest did not retract. The plane did not groan, as if the world had turned in a way it could not bear. The stage remained set. The players remained themselves. The script had not yet been rewritten. Margaret found her voice first, though it arrived in the smallest of volumes, pitched mostly to herself, a habit of those who have learned to avoid making unnecessary ripples. "Well," she said, not unkindly, and then folded her hands in her lap the way someone folds linens they hope to keep unwrinkled. A few rows back, an older gentleman spoke softly into his phone, saying that he might be a little late, but that he would bring pie, and all would be well. A young person in a hoodie murmured something about a college game, then fell silent again when the mood up front refused to return to its previous ease. Emily remained by the aisle, not advancing, not retreating, her hand near the bulkhead as if claiming the space. She looked at Maya as if waiting for an apology that would not come because none was owed. After a beat, she spoke a phrase that tried to sound like finality. "Thank you for your cooperation." She did not leave room for an answer, and Maya did not offer one. Some courtesies are not replies. They are boundaries. A gentle clatter rose as overhead bins were closed, and the cabin door gave its quiet, mechanical sigh, the signal that the world on board and the world off board had entered that particular separation that air travel enforces. The safety demonstration began, the attendants moving through the practice ballet of buckles and straps, and gestures toward exits. Emily did her part with precision. Her smile returned when it was called for by training, but it did not reach her eyes, and the eyes that watched her now were different eyes than the ones that had watched her before. In the stillness that comes when the demonstration ends and before the engines begin their low, promising hum, a minor shift took place. It was not loud, it did not require a speech. It lived in the way a few shoulders squared, in the way one set of lips pressed together as if holding a private vow, in the way attention widened rather than narrowed. In such moments, people decide whether to be furniture or witnesses. On this flight, in this small section of forward cabin, more than one person chose the latter without declaring it out loud. The climax of a small chapter can fit inside the soft sound of paper hitting plastic. When Emily set the boarding pass down with more force than the paper deserved, the gesture carried the weight that words often fail to carry, because words can be denied, but sounds are heard. Maya held her composure with the quiet strength of someone who has learned across years and many rooms that dignity cannot be borrowed from others and cannot be taken by them either. The plane would lift, or it would not. The evening would proceed, or it would not. But she would not be told, by method or by manner, that her place was somewhere else, at the edge of the scene, where observation shades into responsibility, a decision form. The man in the understated blazer had watched long enough to know that some records are worth keeping, not because they will prove something to strangers, but because they steady the person who knows what was true. He did not announce himself. He did not stand. He did not demand. He chose a simple act in a quiet tone, guided by a sense that testimony sometimes begins with preparation rather than declaration. David Clark quietly raised his phone and pressed the record button. David Clark had already set his phone to record, the small red blush of the interface hidden against his palm as he angled the lens toward row 2 with the discretion of someone taking notes in a quiet library. The forward cabin breathed in that expectant hush before engines wake. Overhead bins clicked shut like gentle metronomes, belts settled with soft snicks, and the public address voice drifted through with reminders about seatbacks and devices. Outside, late November, cloud light drained toward a soft gray, and on the ramp, a service truck paused and rolled on, as if the whole airport were rehearsing patience. Dr. Maya Johnson remained composed, her boarding pass tucked away again, her posture as steady as a bookend. The warmth in the cabin lights promised comfort, but attention had gathered itself and refused to disperse. From the aisle, Emily Carter did not retire to the galley. She slipped her phone from her apron pocket, with a motion more suited to a break room than a forward cabin, and cradled it low near the service cart, her expression rearranging itself into a practiced mask of cheerful inconvenience. The glow of a camera interface brushed her cheek. She angled the phone toward herself the way people do when they intend the camera to overhear a story rather than simply tell it. Her voice was pitched just above a whisper, but microphones tend to make confidences carry. "Up front again," she murmured, as if confiding to an unseen friend. Another seating situation on a full holiday flight. She did not say Maya's name. She did not need to. The frame showed the first rows and a hint of the woman in 2A, and the implication did the rest. There's a particular tone that offers up a person to spectators without admitting that is what it is doing. Emily had found it. A second attendant at the galley door glanced up, startled, then busy, then silent. In the first row aisle seat, Margaret Wilson pinched the edge of her cardigan and glanced from the phone to Maya and back, puzzlement settling like a soft shawl across her shoulders. David steadied his own hand, the witness of one camera observing the posture of another. Across in row 3, Sophia Martinez, who had earlier wrestled scarf and paperback into compliant places, leaned forward with an expression that paired concern with deliberation, as if she were mentally highlighting facts in a paragraph. Not far behind, a young man in a college sweatshirt murmured about a football score, then stopped because the air had changed again, and he felt, without naming it, that noise would be a kind of harm. The seatbelt sign chimed to life. The doors were closed. A small, practical eternity often passes in these moments while paperwork catches up to people, and into that space walked Thomas Miller. He carried himself with the careful dignity of middle management, each step a reminder that procedure should be obeyed, because without it, nothing will move where it is supposed to go. He offered the front row a courteous nod that asked them not to be anxious, and then he turned to Maya with an air of studied calm. "Good afternoon," he said, as if the hour could be soothed into politeness, simply by naming it. "I am the cabin service manager. I need to recheck your boarding pass and identification." Maya's reply did not try to soften reality or resist it. "Of course." She offered the items as one offers something that belongs to both parties. It is hers, but he has a duty to witness it. Thomas examined the documents with attention that tried to look like care and kept slipping into doubt. He raised the pass toward the light, tilting and red-ilting it as if it would confess to something the ink had not said aloud. He looked at the name, then at Maya, then at the seat, then at the front bulkhead where a placard announced the flight's number and destination. His mouth performed the small frown of a person searching for permission to say no. Sophia found her voice first, a careful thread of sound meant to steady rather than inflame. I saw her boarding pass when she sat down, she said, directing the comment toward no one and everyone. It says, first class. Her tone was almost apologetic, the way people apologize for noticing, because noticing sometimes feels like trespass even when it is simply responsibility. Thomas did not look at Sophia. Thank you, he said into the general air, the syllables clearly not meant for her. He returned the identification and let the boarding pass rest a heartbeat longer in his hand than courtesy required. We are at capacity in this cabin. When assignments are in question, we are required to verify through our channels. The words had the benevolent severity of posted rules. They did not answer the moment so much as stand in front of it. Emily lifted her chin slightly, as if the current had swung to carry her forward. She shifted her phone to a more discreet angle near her hip and, without looking at the lens, spoke sideways to it in the sing-song of a storyteller encouraging an audience to lean in. We are handling it, she said, which often means we intend to be seen handling it. The phone's glass caught the cabin light, and for a fraction of a second, a thin reflection of Maya's profile hovered on the screen before sliding away. Maya kept her voice quiet enough to respect the public space and steady enough to dignify it. I am happy to wait while you check, she said. If there's anything else you need from me, please tell me now. Those words landed like a small bridge, an offer to meet halfway that might keep anyone from stepping into the river. Thomas did not cross it. He stepped back a fraction and keyed his crew phone. The conversation that followed was mostly a series of pauses and a few phrases that are used when people wish to be understood without admitting what they are saying. Yes, up front, he said. Seat 2A. He listened. Boarding pass matches, but there is an irregularity. He listened again. I would like to avoid a delay if possible. He listened a third time. Understood. He ended the call with the fatal calm of someone who has chosen to believe that inconvenience is a kind of guilt. Ma'am, he said, and the honorific arrived like a traffic cone. We may need you to step off the aircraft briefly for an additional verification. It should only take a few moments. The pressure in the forward rows shifted, like a room noticing that a window has been opened behind the curtain. Margaret's hands tightened around each other. David's phone trembled once and steadied, the lens holding his watch like a gaze that refuses to blink. Sophia inhaled, building a sentence that would not come out as accusation, but as memory. I saw. Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again. Across the aisle, a man with the posture of someone who has learned to make space for others sat straighter, as if the act of sitting straighter could keep a person in her seat. Maya glanced at the window, at the wing's patient geometry, and back to Thomas. I have already presented valid documentation, she said. If there is a system error, perhaps the supervisor could come here to review it instead. There was no heat in her tone. Only the logic of a person who understands that dignity is most easily kept when one does not have to stand and carry it through a crowded place. Emily spoke before Thomas could. We cannot delay an entire plane, she said, crisp as a receipt. It is a holiday flight. People have connections in Los Angeles. We need the right guests in the right seats. There are sentences that sound like order and mean preference. This was one. The cabin was no longer simply a collection of travelers. It had become a set of witnesses deciding whether they would be furniture or chorus. A murmur from behind rose and faded. In row 4, a debate about football clicked off, as if a radio had been gently turned to the left. Near the bulkhead, the second attendant busied herself with an inventory sheet, the movements just a shade too precise, the way people perform attention to tasks when they are trying not to be recruited by a scene. Thomas adjusted his tie, a small reset, and offered a compromise shaped like a command. Please gather your things, he said. If the verification confirms, We will reboard you immediately. This promise behaves like mercy in theory and like humiliation in practice. It requires the one who has been questioned to make of herself a procession for the benefit of those doing the questioning. Maya did not move. I will comply with any lawful instruction, she said. But I must ask you to consider that you have in hand the necessary proof. I do not wish to obstruct. I do wish to avoid an unnecessary scene in front of other passengers. She did not look at Emily's phone, still angled at the world like an eye that expects to be entertained. She did not look at David's phone, angled at the same world like a ledger. Sophia found her courage again and pushed it gently into the space. She's correct, she said. I saw the boarding pass when she sat down. It said, first class. She pressed her palms to her knees after she spoke, as if grounding herself against the unlikely fright of telling a simple truth out loud. Thomas registered Sophia's words but chose to treat them as weather, something to be endured but not acted upon. Thank you, he said, with a politeness that closed doors rather than opened them. He met Maya's eyes. Ma'am, I need you to stand now. The plane never gets louder than when it is trying to be silent. Fabric whispered, plastic creaked, human patience clicked between not wanting a delay and not wanting to be complicit. Some were toward the rear, some's laugh started and died. Outside, one of the ground crew raised an arm in a small signal to no one in particular and was answered by no one in particular, and everything kept waiting. The moment where a chapter tips into its final movement arrived with the ease of a blade sliding back into a sheath. Thomas added the word that changes suggestion into threat. If you do not stand voluntarily, security will assist. Maya's breath was so quiet that only the small rise and fall at her collar could testify to it. She did not speak. She did not reach for her bag. She let the sentence hang in the air long enough that its shape could be seen by everyone who had not yet admitted they knew what it looked like. In that stillness, the moral weather shifted for those close enough to feel it. People choose who they are in increments. Some choices are tiny and invisible. Others stand up in a narrow aisle and announce themselves. A voice from across the aisle cleared, and a man with careful posture and a calm way of holding his shoulders. Robert Evans began to lift from his seat as if the air had offered him a hand. He did not raise his voice at first. He let clarity do the work. Robert Evans stood halfway up. This is not right. I saw with my own eyes she has a first-class boarding pass. But Officer Brown's warning voice sounded, Sir, take your seat now, or else. Officer Brown's warning cut the air, and Robert Evans arrested his rise as if a hand had briefly pressed his shoulder. The half-stand became a reluctant return to the cushion. His palms lifted a fraction in an unspoken peace. Silence reknit itself around row 2. The fragile kind that forms when a room tries very hard not to take sides. The overhead lights held steady. The scent of brewed coffee drifted forward from the galley. Somewhere behind, a zipper sighed and the child whispered to a tablet. The plane waited, nose pointed toward a night that had not yet arrived, while people decided who they intended to be by the time it did. Thomas Miller stepped into that waiting with the deliberate calm of policy made flesh. He nodded once to Officer Brown, once to the passengers nearest him, and then centered his gaze on Dr. Maya Johnson. Ma'am, he said, and the word was both respectful and distancing. I will ask you one more time to gather your things and accompany us to the gate for a brief verification. His tone suggested inconvenience as courtesy, the way some phrases manage to sound like help while operating as removal. Maya's reply kept to a temperature that would not scald anyone who touched it. You have my documents, she said. You have my name, my seat, and the class of service on the valid boarding pass. If there is an error between systems, I ask that you bring a supervisor here to review it. I prefer not to walk the length of the aircraft for a matter your team can resolve at my seat. She did not look at Emily Carter. She did not look at David Clark. She held Thomas's gaze as if offering a small, sturdy bridge and asking him to consider stepping onto it. Emily shifted, the soft rustle of fabric that often announces a decision. Her phone, held low near her apron, remained angled so that its lens looked toward her own shoulder and the cabin behind it, the frame ready to receive a narrative if one were offered. Her smile had become the kind that plays to a crowd she could not see. We all appreciate your patience, she murmured toward no one in particular. That practice lilt that keeps a performance from omitting it is one. It is a full holiday flight. We have to get the right guests in the right seats so everyone can make their connections. Around them, the small sounds of agreement and fatigue rose and fell. Aside from row 4, the soft click of a seatbelt reset by a hand that had not unfastened it, the careful way a grandmother shifted in one seat to see without appearing to stare. Margaret Wilson's hands folded themselves neatly in her lap, quelling an impulse to speak that she could not yet shape into a sentence she trusted. Sophia Martinez, 2 rows back, leaned forward with the alert posture of someone who has already decided, quietly and privately, that she will not allow memory to be rewritten by repetition. The public address chimed and the captain's voice came through, low and courteous, a sound designed to gather attention without disturbing Anisin's blood. He apologized for a small delay while final preparations were completed. He thanked everyone for patience on a busy travel day. He promised that they would be on their way as soon as possible. The voice did not mention what was happening in row 2. It did not need to. People already knew. Thomas adjusted his tie, a modest resetting gesture that signaled a decision had been made. "Ma'am, consider this a final courtesy request," he said. "Please stand now. If you do not, we will proceed with assistance." The word assistance sat in the air like a velvet rope stretched across a doorway. Not heavy, not sharp, but firm enough to bar passage. Maya inhaled through her nose, exhaled through her mouth, and let the breath carry her spine a fraction taller. She directed her next sentence into the narrow space where dignity and compliance tried to live together. "I will comply with any lawful instruction," she said. "I ask that you consider your duty of care to all passengers, including me." It was a sentence that could have been printed on good paper. Officer Brown stepped closer by the necessary inches, a presence rather than a threat. His stance squared but not aggressive, his hands visible, his voice kept for later. He had the look of a person who understands that procedure sometimes asks him to protect the wrong thing, and that he will be judged for how gently he carries out such requests. He did not look at Emily's phone. He did not look at David's lens. He looked at Maya, then at Thomas, then at the empty space where a better answer might land if someone offered it. In first class on a night like this, gratitude and impatience often move in pairs. Someone near the aisle whispered about a connection in Los Angeles and a car waiting and a dinner that might grow cold. Someone else murmured that fairness matters more than a schedule, and a third person breathed through both sentiments at once, remembering the last time a stranger had been asked to prove what others were permitted to assume. The cabin's mood acquired a low, steady hum, not angry yet, but no longer content to be furniture. Emily's phone caught the light and then lost it as she stepped a fraction to her left. "We cannot keep the entire aircraft waiting," she said more crisply, as if the sentence could push a heavy object. "This is a simple verification." The last 2 words arrived like a misnamed item on the menu. Familiar letters arranged in a way that did not match what would be served. Maya glanced once at the window, where the wing's steady line held a small promise that flight would follow if people would only choose the path that led to it. She turned back to Thomas, and in that movement those closest to her felt how much discipline it took to keep warmth in one's voice when one's words had been weighed out loud. "If I stand and walk with you now," she said, "I would want assurance that this is not an exhibition." She did not say the word humiliation. She did not need to. Thomas looked past her, over her shoulder, as if the bulkhead might offer a cue. Policy does not give people words for moments when policy itself is the problem. He fell back on sequence. "Ma'am, I will count to 10, he said. The tone of someone announcing a late boarding call rather than a choice that could damage a person. "If you have not stood by then, Officer Brown will proceed." He had been taught to speak with neutrality, and he did. Even so, the sentence made a few people flinch who had not flinched for a long time. The forward cabin became a stopwatch made of breath. Margaret's fingers found the edge of her cardigan and held it as if fabric might keep a promise where people had not. Sophia's eyes did what the best witnesses' eyes do. They cataloged without gossiping. They read without assuming. They prepared to remember. David steadied his wrist, and his camera steadied with it. the way an oath can be made without words. A young traveler in a hoodie closed his eyes and opened them again, like someone choosing whether to listen hard or pretend not to hear. 1, Thomas said. The number reached the air as naturally as an exhale. Maya did not move. She would not be hurried into a motion she had not chosen. 2, the overhead lights hummed. Behind row 3, a cough punctuated the count like a metronome briefly finding a beat. 3, Emily's breath quickened by the smallest fraction. She watched the scene with the attention of an actor watching a cue. 4, the plane's closed door made its presence felt, that quiet, sealed certainty that divides the world into those within and those without. 5, Officer Brown centered his weight not an inch farther forward than the manual allows, not an inch farther back than conscience prefers. 6, Margaret lifted her chin, not defiantly, not meekly, but as a person who has decided that if she must speak this week, she will speak on the side of the better angels she was raised to believe in. 7, Sophia's hand hovered a fraction off her knee, wanting to rise, willing itself to wait until words would land where they might help rather than harden. 8, in the quiet, the distant clank of a service truck echoed as if from another country where other people were being asked other questions. 9, David's camera saw what I sometimes miss, the tremor of a muscle at a jawline, the way breath changes shape when it is forced to carry history as well as oxygen. 10, the last number felt less like a count and more like a small curtain being tugged. Thomas nodded once to Officer Brown, and the nod carried the hidden clause that so often shadows such moments. We offer her a choice. The climax of the chapter did not explode. It simply arrived. If you do not stand, Thomas said, we will have you escorted from the aircraft. He spoke the sentence as lightly as a person might announce a gate change. The words nonetheless had the weight that comes from being used to keep certain people moving and certain people seated in airports and elsewhere for a very long time. Maya's face did not harden. It did not crumble. It did not perform anything for anyone. She allowed a long breath to travel its full course. The kind of breath taught in places where people learn how to keep their center when the room would prefer that they lose it. She reached for her phone, not as a prop, not as a shield, but as a tool. Her thumb moved with the certainty of someone sending a message to someone whose care would not ask her to leave herself behind to receive it. No one heard what she typed. Everyone sensed that she had said something that did not need to be spoken out loud to be true. The plane waited with her. The engines had not yet wound up to their confident hymn. The ramp crew busied itself beyond the window, seen and unseen. The captain, somewhere behind a reinforced door, reviewed the checklist that never includes the items required for this kind of moment. People in holiday sweaters and business coats and college hoodies lived inside a pocket of time that had stretched thinner than it should have. Learning again that justice often asks the very person who has been questioned to carry the burden of keeping the temperature of the room safe for everyone else. Emily adjusted her grip on the phone as if shifting to a new scene. Her expression returned to the trained smile that looks like service and sometimes is. Thomas opened his mouth to repeat himself, which would not change anything. Officer Brown inhaled to speak the line he had hoped would not be required. Margaret tilted forward an inch. Sophia began to rise a fraction. David captured the breath between moments, the way a camera sometimes catches grace where words have not yet taken root. Maya set her phone on the armrest as gently as a person sets down a cup in a quiet room. Her other hand moved toward the inside pocket of her jacket with the deliberate economy of someone taking a card from a place where she keeps things that matter. The aisle, the row, the galley, the forward cabin, all of it seemed to lean in. Not out of hunger for spectacle, but out of the ancient instinct that recognizes a hinge the instant before the door turns. Maya set her phone on the table and drew from her jacket a small leather case inside. A business card gleamed with lettering that made everyone pause. The leather case lay open on the tray table, its soft hinge holding a small moment in place. Dr. Maya Johnson eased out a single card and set it squarely where all eyes could find it. The cabin's glow caught the crisp lettering and made it speak without effort. Liberty Aerospace, Chief Executive Officer. She did not raise her voice. She let the words on the card do their first work, then added the rest with the calm cadence of a person who has had to practice truth until it sounds ordinary. This aircraft is under active lease with my company, she said. The tail registration matches my records. A low ripple moved through the forward rows, the kind that accompanies a picture sliding into focus. Feet stilled, hands paused halfway to armrests. The faint clink of serviceware in the galley quieted as if sound itself were listening for what would come next. Thomas Miller looked at the card as a man looks at a door he does not wish to open. A fast dismissal flickered across his face and settled into a professional frown. Anyone can print a business card, he said, shaping the sentence to sound pragmatic rather than reflexive. The words sat on the air like a warning label pasted over evidence. He glanced toward Emily Carter, then toward Officer Brown, then back to Maya with a supervisory patience that had already decided the outcome. Emily's phone hovered lower now, the lens pointed not so obviously toward herself, a shadow audience invited to hear a story that was not being told plainly. She angled the screen away when a sliver of reflection revealed the curve of Maya's profile. Maya did not argue with the card. She reached into her coat again, drew out her phone, and opened a message thread whose subject lines were clear enough for anyone near to read without strain. Lease agreements, registration updates, maintenance windows. Here, she said, bring up a document with the ease of someone who lives by accurate paper. She tapped to enlarge a line of text that named the tail in letters and numbers, then set the screen beside the card. Cross-check this registration with what you see out the window and with your internal manifest. She did not press the phone into Thomas's hand. She let the evidence rest where dignity prefers it, within reach, but not thrust. Sofia Martinez leaned forward in row 3, her eyes making a quick, precise movement of someone confirming a fact in 2 places at once. That is the same registration on the wing, she said in a voice whose softness did not erase its clarity. It is the same. The sentence arrived like a small lamplight in a dim room. Margaret Wilson in 1C folded her hands and looked from the card to Maya to Thomas, the quiet, calculating glance of a woman who has learned over many years that some moments ask you to decide whether you prefer ease or truth. David Clark adjusted his grip and tightened the frame. His recording did not hunt for drama. It sought steadiness. A lens can be a promise when a room begins to tilt. Through it, he caught the way Officer Brown's stance changed by a fraction. The way a man makes room in his orders for the possibility that the person in front of him might be carrying more authority than the script permits. The officer's eyes moved from the card to the phone, to the window, and then to Thomas with a small inquiry in them. Do you intend to pretend you have not seen this? Thomas did not pick up the phone. He did not bend to read the line again. As I said, he murmured, we have our channels. He keyed his crew handset and turned his shoulder in a gesture that borrowed privacy without granting it. The half-heard phrases were the usual latticework of procedure. Forward cabin, C2A, verification pending. He listened and nodded, listened and frowned, listened and exhaled through his nose in a sound that declared his decision had not been improved by whatever he had been told. While he stood there, Emily shifted to the galley threshold and adopted the fixed smile of a person who expects the crowd in her pocket to forgive anything labeled a policy. The lease is current. Maya said, not to win an argument, but to place a stake in the ground where anyone might find it later. If you need more confirmation, your operations center can call Liberty's 24-hour verification line. They will recognize my name. She did not add the rest. The part about the parent company and equity stakes, and the kinds of meetings where contracts are extended or ended with a signature and a sentence. Her restraint was not a secret. It was a grace. Across the aisle, Robert Evans watched with the posture of a man measuring when to add weight to a scale that should have balanced itself by now. He had already spoken once. He would speak again if the room's moral weather continued to blow in the wrong direction. The young traveler in the college sweatshirt sat very still, as if stillness could make a witness more accurate. Margaret's chin lifted the smallest degree, which can sometimes be a prayer. Thomas ended the call and returned the handset to his cradle. Ma'am, he said, erecting each syllable as if it could double as a fence post. Until we receive official internal confirmation, I am not authorizing you to remain seated. The sentence held itself out as neutral while carrying the weight of many other sentences spoken in many other rooms over many other years. Emily's head tilted toward the handset as if she had been helpful. Officer Brown's jawline tightened by the width of a breath. Maya pressed her thumb against the document on her phone and scrolled to a second page, one filled with dates written out in words, signatures rendered as neat initials, clauses about maintenance time and delivery windows. Your captain can resolve this in a moment, she said. He will know how to escalate the call and whom to ask for at operations, or he can speak to the signatory listed here. Her finger rested beneath a line that held a name tied to a title, tied to a chain of decisions that reached from this seat to a boardroom where people spoke of fleets as if they were chess pieces. The aisle acquired a current, the way narrow spaces do when authority changes direction. It began as a shadow at the forward bulkhead and resolved into a familiar silhouette. A captain in a pressed uniform stepping into the cabin with a face set for hard weather. Captain William Harris took in the tableau without hurry. First, the passenger in 2A, composed and upright. A card and a screen on the table in front of her. Then the manager with his jaw carefully firm. Then the attendant with a phone she should not be holding. Then the officer with patience braced like a beam. His gaze returned to the table. He did not pick up the card. He read it where it lay. The title did not surprise him so much as the fit between the quiet of the woman and the authority of the words. Everyone step back from C2A, he said, his voice low enough to calm a room and strong enough to hold it. Suspend all removal actions. The sentence did not shout. It carried a pilot's habit of moving a great machine with steady hands. Thomas's lips parted as if to object and then closed again, as if a hand had rested on them. Emily's smile frayed at the corner. Officer Brown eased one foot back, then the other. In row 3, Sophia's shoulders lowered on a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Margaret let out a sound that was half sigh, half thank you. Captain Harris looked at Maya and inclined his head with the respect due to any passenger and the particular courtesy that belongs to one whose dignity has been pinned to a wall and asked to wait there. Dr. Johnson, he said, naming her as the card named her, acknowledging both person and position at once. I apologize for this delay and for any discourtesy you have experienced. He did not look toward the galley while he said it. He did not need to. The apology had a destination, and it arrived where it should. Maya returned a nod, neither magnifying the courtesy nor diminishing it. Thank you, Captain, she said. I appreciate your intervention. I would also appreciate your help in closing this matter promptly and properly. The words sat on the air like a pledge signed in ink. David's recording caught the play of expressions that followed. The way Emily's eyes flicked, the way Thomas's shoulders recalibrated to a new gravity, the way Officer Brown's stance relieved itself by a hair's breadth, the way nearby passengers allowed relief to register without turning it into noise. In cabins and courtrooms and kitchens, leadership often looks like the courage to be specific. Harris reached for specific. Operations will want to hear this from me, he said, lifting the interphone from its cradle with the routine care of a man who knows that machines answer to tone as much as to touch. Before he dialed, he glanced at the phone on the tray table, read the registration one more time, and gave a small nod. Thank you for making this straightforward. Thomas found his voice thinner now, dressed in a code of procedure that did not fit as well as it had a moment earlier. Captain, we were only attempting to prevent misuse of the cabin. The explanation sounded like a ladder that ended one round too soon. Harris did not climb it. You have attempted enough, he said, without heat. From here, we will verify with the people authorized to speak for the lease. He turned slightly toward Emily. And no phones on duty. Put it away. He had not raised his voice. Even so, the reprimand had a kind of quiet that reaches farther than volume. Emily lowered the device into her apron pocket, as if dropping a stone into water and trying not to make a splash. Her cheeks held a color that did not belong to cabin lighting. She looked at the card again and understood too late that there are names one should have recognized even without titles. Margaret stared at the aisle carpet and willed herself to remember this moment the next time somebody near her needed a witness. Sophia's gaze softened. Robert's jaw eased. Harris dialed. The line connected with a small click that announces a human on the other end of a wire. He spoke with the spare diction of a man who has learned to put facts in order before emotion is allowed to move. He identified the flight, the location, the issue. He named the passenger and the company, the lease, the registration. He paused once, the pause that asks the other voice to accept reality rather than question it. He listened, nodded, and spoke again in sentences that made a path through a thicket. The removal had been halted, the passenger would remain seated, internal verification would proceed now, not later. Around them, the forward cabin held on to its quiet. People began again the small habits that traveling requires: a blanket pulled up to a shoulder, a book opened to a waiting chapter, a headset adjusted, a prayer set down without words. Between rows, relief moved like a breeze. The plane itself seemed to relax by a filament's worth of tension, as if the airframe could feel when the human knot had loosened. Thomas stood where he was, neither stepping forward into the new order nor stepping back to make room for it. Emily fixed her apron tie and studied a stain on the galley counter as if merit could be restored by polishing metal. Officer Brown resumed the guard of a different kind, one that protects a person instead of a policy. David kept recording, not out of glee now, but out of respect for a record that might teach someone else how to do better next time. Sophia reached for her water and took a careful sip, grounding herself in a small, human act. Margaret pressed a palm lightly to her chest and let her hand fall again. Harris listened to a short burst of instructions from the other end, then squared his shoulders. He was not a man given to theater. Even so, there was an unmistakable shift as he prepared to move the matter to the next rung where authority and responsibility meet in daylight. The handset warmed against his palm. The flight waited in the way flights wait when time becomes elastic. In that narrow aisle, with dignity restored to his seat and procedure summoned to the right place, the next step arrived with a simple, practical sound. The interphone rang. Harris lifted the handset. Yes, connect me with Richard Collins right away. Captain William Harris stood with the interphone pressed to his ear, his expression composed in that particular way pilots cultivate, as if any problem might be navigated by sequencing the right facts in the right tone. In the forward rows, the air settled into a listening quiet. Dr. Maya Johnson had returned her leather case to her jacket pocket and rested her hands lightly on the armrest, the business card and the phone with the lease excerpt still visible on the tray table like two steady lanterns. Officer Daniel Brown had shifted from readiness to watchfulness, a posture that guarded dignity rather than removed it. Thomas Miller kept his chin lifted as if holding a line no longer there. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the galley, her hands occupied with nothing in particular now that the phone had disappeared. Her face wearing a fragile neutrality taught in training sessions and tested in rooms like this. The cabin lights hummed softly. The late November gray pressed against the windows inside the aircraft. A small committee of conscience convened itself without agenda or minutes. Operations, Harris said, his voice low and exact. Captain Harris, American Skyways 328, forward cabin. Call priority. I need verification on a lease and the passenger identity. Yes, the passenger is Dr. Maya Johnson, Liberty Aerospace. Tail registration. He glanced once at the phone on the tri-matches what I have in front of me. He paused, listening. That skilled waiting that does not waste time because it arranges it. Understood. Please connect me directly to regional. I will hold. The quiet between words was not empty. It was the careful room he made for other people to do their jobs quickly and well. Maya did not feel the pause. She let truth breathe the way one lets a wound take air before the bandage. When Harris looked to her, she offered only what would keep the line short. If needed, they can reach Liberty's 24-hour verification desk, she said. There is also a direct number for the signatory listed on the final page of that contract excerpt. Sophia Martinez, 2 rows back, folded her hands and resisted the urge to add her own memory of the registration she had read on the wing. Margaret Wilson's fingers interlaced as if holding a prayer. David Clark kept his phone steady, not an inch of it intrusive. A quiet witness rather than a provocation. The handset clicked, the sound of a human line opening. Harris, the captain said, recognition entering his tone. Yes, sir. Those nearest could hear only one side of the exchange, but tone often tells a story more cleanly than words. He briefed the issue from the top. Who, what, where, the present status. He affirmed that no removal actions were underway. He requested immediate confirmation from a department authorized to speak for the lease. Then he listened again, and in that listening, the forward rows felt the moment begin to turn like a wheel finding a better track. Copy Harris said, "Thank you." He looked at Thomas, at Emily, and then at Maya. They are bringing in Mr. Collins. He did not announce Richard's title. He did not need to. The name arrived like a key turned half a measure in the long lock. The next voice reached them only through Harris's responses, but his posture told those watching that he was speaking peer-to-peer, not petition to gate. He confirmed the tail number, the lease, the identity. He kept his sentences short, like handholds set at the right distance for someone to climb. Then he stood a breath straighter, the way a person does when an authority upstream has placed weight behind the decision already made in the room. Yes, he said, understood. He listened once more and added, I will handle it personally. Thomas shifted his stance, finding no policy to stand behind that would prevent the recognition already underway. He tried the old scaffolding. Captain, to be clear, our concern? Harris cut the sentence without cutting the man. Mr. Miller, our concern is the dignity and safety of all passengers, including Dr. Johnson, he said, and the integrity of our operations. His voice neither rose nor sharpened. It simply named the values at stake and placed them in the right order. He returned the interphone to its cradle and faced the little circle of actors in the forward cabin. Regional has confirmed, he said, so that nearby rows could hear. Liberty Aerospace is the lessor of this aircraft, and Dr. Johnson is its chief executive. She remains in her seat. A soft release moved through the cabin, the subtle relaxation that follows when a room's private verdict aligns with the announced one. Further, Harris continued, we owe her a direct apology and immediate corrective action. He looked to Thomas. Mr. Miller, you will accompany me to the galley. He looked to Emily. Miss Carter, you will remain here and speak to no one until I return. He looked to Officer Brown. Officer, your assistance is appreciated. Please stand down. Harris stepped into the galley with Thomas, not to hide anything, but because some sentences must be spoken where the larger room can hear the outcome but not the humiliation. The slit of space did not keep David's camera from seeing the arc of the moment, and it did not keep the forward rows from hearing what they needed to hear. The captain's voice was measured, the way one reads a formal notice so it cannot be misunderstood. Per direction from Mr. Collins, he said, effective immediately, Miss Emily Carter is relieved of duty and will be terminated for conduct unbecoming and violation of policy. You, Mr. Miller, are suspended pending investigation and removed from service for the remainder of this rotation. There was no relish in the words. There was only the gravity of accountability. Emily's breath caught, audible even over the hush. The forward cabin did not gloat. Margaret's eyes softened. Sophia lowered her gaze as if to grant a stranger a small privacy. Robert Evans exhaled as a man does when the load he had hoped not to lift is taken off his shoulders anyway. Officer Brown's attention shifted to the passengers, making sure they were absorbing, not inflaming. Thomas swallowed. He had built a structure out of rules and found, in the space of a minute, that he had omitted the first rule. Harris returned to the aisle. He did not stand in front of Maya as if to block her view of what followed. He stood beside her, the physical choreography of respect. Dr. Johnson, he said, I apologize on behalf of the airline. This never should have happened. In the same breath, he addressed the cabin at large in the even warmth of a practiced announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we experienced a delay related to a verification in our forward cabin. The matter is resolved. We will be departing as soon as final paperwork is complete. I appreciate your patience. He did not invite applause and did not receive it. What he received instead was the deeper quiet that comes when people recognize leadership and steady themselves by it. From the interphone came another brief summons. Harris listened for a few seconds, then answered in that business-like tone that reassures while it instructs. Understood. I will settle the cabin and call you back from the flight deck. He replaced the handset and turned back to the group. Ms. Carter, he said, not unkindly, you will take a passenger seat in the back until gate arrival. Collect nothing. Say nothing. Mr. Miller, you will debrief by phone with Regional in 30 minutes. Officer Brown, thank you. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. Words assembled and fell apart behind her lips. Explanations that would not bear weight. Apologies not yet earned. She nodded once. As she stepped past Maya, she did not meet her eyes. She slid down the aisle, the way a person leaves a room after bumping a table hard enough to spill glasses. Thomas remained in the galley, his headset already in his hand, his face set to that blank, firm patience company policies demand of the newly disciplined. With the crew repositioned, the cabin exhaled, as if the air had been pinched at the front and suddenly released. A grandmother straightened the collar of her cardigan. A young traveler settled a headset over his ears, though no music yet played. David lowered his phone a fraction, but did not stop recording. Records, properly kept, do not humiliate, they teach. Sophia took a small sip of water, her eyes on the aisle, calm now, but ready to bear witness for anyone who might need it. Robert rolled his shoulders gently and rested back. Harris faced Maya once more, a question in his eyes that asked for guidance as much as it offered it. This is a place where many captains end, with a correction and a promise and a move back to the cockpit, and it would have been enough on many days. But this day was not many days, and the woman in 2A was not simply a problem resolved. She was a person whose humanity had been balanced against convenience and found wanting until she set the balance right. He knew a cabin could break or mend based on what happened next. Maya looked at the card still resting on the tray, and at the phone beside it, then at the rows of faces that had been enlisted without consent into a moment bigger than any of them wanted. She did not hurry. She did not dramatize. She allowed gratitude to cross her face for the people who had stood with her in small ways. A nod, a steady camera, a softly spoken fact. She let her hands rest open on the armrests, the universal gesture of someone prepared to speak plainly, but not to wound. The climax of this chapter did not scream. It clarified. Harris squared himself to the role's captain, host, representative, and spoke one more sentence for the record, his voice directed toward no one and everyone. Per regional leadership, corrective actions are in motion and will be documented. We will brief the entire cabin before takeoff with a formal apology. Procedure had finally chosen its correct object, not the removal of a person, but the repair of a harm. The pattern had been broken at its seam, and the right thread pulled through. The captain gestured a small permission with his hand, that quiet invitation leaders use when they recognize that someone else has the words needed now. Maya answered the invitation by lifting her gaze along the aisle, not to command attention, but to receive it gently if it came. Her voice was the same one she had used from the beginning, even, human, careful with other people's hearts. I want to say a few words to everyone if Captain allows. The captain gave a small nod that granted the floor, and the cabin settled into the soft attention that comes when strangers agree, without saying so, to listen kindly. Doctor, Maya Johnson did not rise. She did not need height to be seen. She rested her hands open on the armrests, and let her voice carry at a measured pace that respected nerves and time. She thanked the captain for his apology and for intervening when dignity had been asked to wait. Then she widened the frame with a few plain words that did not accuse, yet did not excuse. She said that travel is a shared promise, and that promises fray when any one person is made to prove what others are allowed to assume. She said that systems can learn if people intend them to, and that intention should be written down, trained in, and measured, not left to chance on a long holiday afternoon. She did not tell a story about herself. She told a story about everyone. The pushback tug bumped the nose gently, and the aircraft began its backward glide from the gate, a slow, deliberate departure that suited the mood. Overhead, the seatbelt sign glowed steady. The windows showed November evening turning the tarmac into a river of small lights. The fragrant ghost of coffee drifted forward from the galley, and the hum of the air system returned to its patient note. Captain William Harris lifted the handset and, in a voice that carried both authority and apology, spoke to the cabin. He apologized once more to Dr. Johnson and to all on board for a delay rooted not in weather or maintenance, but in judgment. He said the airline took responsibility. The quiet that followed did not feel heavy. It felt like a room choosing to believe a person because he had chosen to be exact about what had gone wrong. Robert Evans leaned a little toward the aisle and, with the careful modesty of someone who does not want to make himself the center of a better moment, let his gratitude cross the short distance to Maya. He said, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded like a hand offered to help someone step off a curb. Maya met his eyes and nodded, the nod that says, "We both did the right small thing when it was hard." In 1C, Margaret Wilson tugged her cardigan into place and cleared her throat. She said, in the gentle vowels of a person who has seen many rooms, that she was sorry for lending her silence to the wrong side of the moment. She did not explain herself. Maya did not ask her to. Maya simply said she appreciated honesty and that change is a practice, not a conclusion. From across the aisle, David Clark lowered his phone to a more comfortable angle and spoke in the tone of a neighbor at a fence. He said he would post a correction and context to accompany anything he had already recorded, that he would make it clear what had happened and how it had been set right, and that he would choose words that did not pour fuel where a little water would do. He was not making a speech. He was promising to be careful with the truth. 2 rows back, Sophia Martinez lifted a hand slightly, the way a student asks to add only what is useful, and offered to help the airline design a short training module in Spanish, a set of practical scenes and phrases that would help attendants serve without presuming. She said she did that work in her day job and would be proud to do it here. Her offer landed in the aisle like a small, well-made bridge. The captain listened, nodded, and then addressed the cabin again. This time, not to apologize, but to set out the path. He said the airline would establish a dedicated hotline for concerns about bias and mistreatment, staffed by people trained to escalate quickly and to listen without defense. He said procedures would be audited and revised, and that those revisions would be taught, practiced, and reinforced. He said the airline would publish regular progress updates, not in the fog of corporate phrases, but in plain numbers written out plainly, and would invite community advocates to read and respond. He did not promise that no one would ever be hurt again. He promised that this harm would change what the company did tomorrow. A murmur of relief moved through the forward rows, the sound people make when policy begins to resemble care. The aircraft nudged forward, joined the slow procession of machines headed toward a ribbon of runway lights, and paused in that pocket of time before takeoff when everyone resettles their thoughts. The second attendant in the galley began to secure loose items with particular tenderness, as if fastening straps could also fasten a new habit. Officer Daniel Brown shifted from watchfulness to something gentler, a posture that says, "I am here if needed, and otherwise I will give you back your peace." Maya spoke once more, only long enough to set a final thought in the room. She said that many people do not have a title to lay on the tray table when the moment turns. She said the point of repair is not to congratulate those who were finally believed, but to build a place where proof is not a burden carried by the same shoulders over and over. She smiled at Margaret and at Robert, at Sophia and at David, not as a queen blessing a court, but as a fellow traveler thanking companions who had chosen witness over furniture. Then she folded her hands, and the forward cabin felt the way a living room sometimes feels when the family has finished saying a hard truth kindly. Captain Harris lifted the handset a third time and, with the calm cadence of a pilot who knows a ritual can heal as well as prepare, made the formal pre-departure apology the airline keeps for moments when it has fallen short. He took responsibility without qualifiers. He talked about the hotline, the reviews, and the reports again, as if saying a plan twice helps it congeal. He thanked passengers for their patience and said that the crew would do everything within their power to get everyone where they needed to be that night. Closer to the back of the cabin, a child clapped once, because the voice on the intercom had the round sound of reassurance. A few adults followed with a brief, polite applause, the kind that blesses a resolved scene and then lets it rest. The aircraft rolled, lined up, and waited for clearance, a long breath held by a very large body. A grandmother in one seat tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and mentioned to no one in particular that she would tip the rideshare driver extra if the hour ran late. A young traveler checked a map of late-night diners near his hotel in Los Angeles and smiled at the thought of a slice of pie and coffee poured from a heavy pot by someone who has been kind to many strangers. In the aisle, the second attendant offered a bottle of water to Maya with a sincerity that did not ask for credit. Maya accepted it with thanks, and, as she took a sip, looked out at the runway lights, braided into the darkness like a long promise. The chapter's crest rose not like a trumpet but like a horizon. The captain, voice steady, confirmed over the intercom that the hotline would go live, that procedures will be reviewed, and that progress will be reported publicly. He spoke the commitments in unadorned language and did not ask the cabin to admire the airline for keeping its word. He asked them to hold the airline to it. The sound that came back was small and human. A few hands meeting briefly, a few shoulders dropping, a few people glancing at one another with relief that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with repair. Engines deepened to their patient thunder. The aircraft began its run, each light along the edge of the pavement winking past like a metronome set to confidence. Maya closed her eyes for a heartbeat and opened them again, ready to let the lift remind everyone aboard that weight can be carried if it is distributed fairly and borne together. Somewhere behind her, David drafted the words of his correction. Sophia sketched the first scenes of a training in her mind. Robert thought about how to tell his nephew what courage looks like when it's quiet. Margaret decided to write a letter to a local paper that's still printed on actual paper, because some towns listen better when the news is folded and left on a porch. The wheels began to turn faster, the cabin leaned into speed, and breath gathered itself for the small, familiar hold before ground falls away. In that held breath, a question arrived. Not to dampen hope, but to keep it honest. A question that belongs to anyone who has heard a promise spoken in good faith and wants to see it kept in daylight rather than remembered in nostalgia. 6 months from now, will tonight's promises still fly? 6 months later, the question that had hovered in the rush toward takeoff, whether tonight's promises would still fly, was answered not by speeches alone, but by work. At the regional headquarters in Dallas, a winter sun laid a white bar of light across the lobby floor. As a handful of reporters filed into a modest press room with a blue backdrop and a row of microphones, Richard Collins stood at the podium with a folder of prepared remarks and pages that looked like what they were: plain language and plain numbers written out in words. He spoke carefully, the way a person reads a recipe that has been tested and tasted. He said that complaints connected to bias and mistreatment have fallen by a meaningful share since the holiday incident, that an around-the-clock hotline was staffed by trained listeners who escalated concerns within 24 hours, and that the airline would continue publishing progress updates each quarter. He named the independent advisors seated in the front row, thanked them without borrowing their authority, and explained that metrics would be audited by people not on the airline's payroll. He ended where he should have begun months earlier, with an apology shaped not as a brand message, but as a record of responsibility. Dr. Maya Johnson stood off to one side, neither guest of honor nor footnote, watching the work of repair proceed the only way it ever does. One policy clarified, one piece of training rewritten, one apology placed in front of the next. When Collins finished, she stepped into a smaller room and signed a memorandum that formalized the collaboration between Liberty Aerospace and the airline, a commitment to share case studies, to open lines between operations teams, and to convene a standing review group that included community advocates, crew representatives, and passengers who had chosen to serve as lay advisors. A staffer set a pot of coffee on a side table next to a box of donuts, and the smell drifted around the room in the hopeful way coffee always does when people are trying to do better in daylight. Across the country in Los Angeles, the Liberty Aerospace office carried its own hum. Whiteboards crowded with diagrams, a training schedule pinned with color text, a glassed-in conference room where Sofia Martinez led a pilot session for a new service module. The title at the top of the handout said what it meant: serving without presuming. She walked attendants through scenes in 2 languages, offered phrases that softened a request without surrendering clarity, and built in pauses where a person can reset their assumptions before they act. Officer Daniel Brown demonstrated de-escalation moves that looked less like tactics and more like courtesy under pressure. How to square a stance that invites calm, how to choose volume and pace that give dignity room to breathe, how to keep a hand visible and empty while a situation cools. He said that much of the job is remembering that people bring more than bags onto airplanes. He said that most of what is called security begins with helping a room feel safe enough to answer a question without flinching. Maya observed the session from a back chair, taking notes with the small, intent motions of someone who runs a company, but has never believed that leadership exempts her from learning in public. She saw what she had hoped to see. Attendants asking steady questions, supervisors admitting where their checklists had been thin, trainees practicing sentences until they landed with a tenderness that keeps a day from getting worse. When the break came, Sophia poured coffee into paper cups and asked for feedback as if she actually meant it. A few attendants traded stories that had been sitting in their chests for years, and for a minute the room felt like a neighborhood kitchen after a storm, everyone checking on one another and offering what they had at hand. Later that week in Silver Lake, a cafe with creaky wood floors and the aroma of dark roast hosted an unplanned reunion. David Clark sat at a small table by the window with a notebook and a laptop, drafting the last in a series of short videos he had promised himself he would make. Reflections on witness and care, filmed without heat and edited without snark. He was joined by Margaret Wilson, who had reached out after reading one of his posts about correcting an earlier narrative. She arrived bundled against the mild chill, ordered a pour-over and a slice of lemon loaf, and tucked a few bills into the tip jar the way a grandmother leaves a blessing on the counter. They talked softly about what it felt like to be near a scene that could have broken into harm and did not, about the ease of rushing to judgment online, about the discipline required to publish a correction and live inside it. Margaret said she had written a letter to her local paper, the kind that still landed folded on porches at dawn, because her town listened best to news it could hold in both hands. David said he had learned to ask himself whether his camera was helping a person or feeding a crowd. At the same hour, a training room at the airline's Dallas campus was filled with the quiet grit of repetition. On a scuffed laminate table, a stack of laminated scenario cards lay face down next to a plate of office cookies and a neatly square pile of evaluation forms. Officer Brown stood before a semicircle of new hires and read a scene from one of the cards, then guided the group through what to say to a passenger who has been asked the same question twice when once should have sufficed. He spoke about choosing words to cool rather than to scorch. He reminded them that verification is a tool, not a cudgel. He did not sermonize. He demonstrated. When an attendant stumbled through a line, he smiled, offered a better one, and had them try again until the room felt the difference. The fluorescent lights hummed. The clock on the wall seemed gentler than usual. Someone opened the door to let in a draft that smelled like winter and copy paper. The story folded back on itself the way lives do when work and conscience meet in public. In Dallas, a reporter asked Collins what would happen if metrics failed to improve in the next quarter. He answered without hedging. He said the airline would add resources, change leadership if required, and open the process further to outside review. He said the company understood that transparency without correction is theater, and theater was not what anyone needed. In Los Angeles, after the training, Maya signed another set of papers that formalized a scholarship fund for attendants from underrepresented communities who wanted to advance to leadership roles. She explained to a quiet cluster of trainees that redesigning systems means redesigning ladders too. When Collins invited Maya to offer a few words at the Dallas event, she stepped to the podium and placed both hands on its edge as if it were the rail of a familiar porch. She did not travel backward to the holiday flight. She traveled forward to the principle that had grown out of it. Justice, she said, is not punishment. Justice is redesigning the system so that everyone is treated with respect. The sentence did not ring like a bell. It settled like a foundation stone, the kind the building rests on without needing to mention it to every passerby. The modest applause that followed sounded more like assent than like celebration, and that felt right. In a hallway afterward, a ground crew worker with grease on his sleeve offered her a nod that said more than a bouquet would have. She nodded back, grateful for a language that did not require adjectives. The day moved along its practical arc. An internal memo went out to crew with bullet points that translated promises into actions. Hotline protocols, response times written in words, new training requirements folded into schedules with enough space that no one would be asked to learn while exhausted. A regional manager pushed a calendar invite for a listening session that would include attendants, pilots, and a representative from a passenger council. Somewhere in the accounting department, a budget line was adjusted to make room for what would be an ongoing expense rather than a one-time fix. None of this made the evening news. All of it made the future a little kinder to strangers. At dusk, the Los Angeles office emptied into streets glimmering with headlights and restaurant neon. Maya chose to walk a few blocks before meeting a car, a habit she kept when a day had been dense with words. The air was cool, and the sky was a bruise-colored blue that would soon give way to night. She stopped by a neighborhood library to drop off a book, then turned toward a community center where a small public forum was being held, an open house to explain the hotline and the training in simple terms to anyone who cared to know. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and oranges. Folding chairs were set in patient rows. A bulletin board carried flyers for a food pantry, a homework club, and a Saturday clinic for flu shots. People arrived in twos and threes. A teacher, a rideshare driver, a retiree who volunteered at a museum, a young mother with a stroller and a grocery list folded into her pocket. Captain Harris was there as well, jacket off, sleeves rolled. Speaking in the plain church basement cadence he seemed to reserve for rooms where trust is earned with specifics. He walked the group through what happens when someone calls a hotline, where the report goes, who reads it, and when the caller hears back. He did not claim perfection, he promised attention. Maya watched faces change the way faces do when details replaced rumors. Muscles softened along jawlines, arms uncrossed. No pages filled with names and times written out in words, because numbers felt too sharp for a room like this. Near the end, an older passenger stepped forward with the cautious grace of someone who prefers to keep his private life private, but had decided that silence is a poor teacher. He wore a blazer that had seen a few careful dry cleanings, and a tie his grandchild might have chosen. He said that a week earlier he had watched a small injustice begin to uncurl on a flight to a small city, and he had heard his own heart say, "Not this time." He had raised his hand, said what he had seen, and asked the crew to try another path. The room listened the way good rooms do. He looked at Maya and said that her story had steadied him in that moment, not because of titles, but because of the ordinary patience she had shown while asking the room to choose better. Maya stepped closer, and he did not step back. She thanked him for the courage to speak in the present tense, and then looked around the room at people who live mostly without microphones and cameras. Her voice stayed low and warm, the way people speak when they are aware of neighbors behind thin walls. She said that repair is not a headline, it is a habit. She said that systems remember what people practice. She smiled lightly, not as a performance, but as an invitation. The older passenger nodded, and the faces in the room reflected back something like agreement dressed as relief. Outside, the sky deepened to a kind of velvet blue. Someone held the door for someone else. A child in a stroller kicked at the air and giggled. A volunteer tidied the chairs into even rows and tucked the extra flyers into a folder for next time. Maya paused near the threshold and looked back once, not to admire anything, but to witness a room at rest after useful talk. A man approached from the side, the older passenger from the microphone. He steps careful over the mat. He spoke quietly, almost shyly, with the plainness of a person placing a thank you note on the table. "Your story helped me speak up on the flight last week." Maya smiled and answered in kind, offering a line meant not to grandly close a chapter but to set a course for the next one. Then we take off again. Wait, our RB asked The story comes to rest the way evening settles over a quiet street. Runway lights fading to memory, a captain's steady apology lingering in the ear, and a small community room where folding chairs, warm coffee, and plain words turned promises into work. What remains is not spectacle, but a lesson gently earned. Justice is not a shout. It is the daily craft of redesigning how we meet one another, where love meant harm and redemption is measured by habits that build a kinder home. Like a porch light left burning at dusk, a single generous act spoken with care, practiced with patience, can guide weary neighbors to a safer door. In our buses and diners, in waiting rooms and church basements, we will meet the same crossroads. To look away or to look up and stand with quiet courage. If this story has found a place in you, consider passing that warmth along one steady word, one fair choice, one open seat, so that the next traveler finds welcome before proof is asked.